I guess it was one of those days I couldn't seem to sleep in my blue jean sheets back under the fantail because the steering engine was making an ungodly racket as some poor freezing sailor tried to keep the raunchy Sundance on course. So I got up for lunch and we had curried something possibly ship's rat, and supper was worse. All through the 3 meals I had to look at Svensson, the boatswain, with his cigarette dripping out of his pursed mouth, the smoke floating upward past his squinted eye as he held forth on the futility of hiring college boys as sailors when master mariners and chief mates were starving on the beach. Then, that night, I came off the forecastle head lookout at midnight, frozen stiff and wet through. When I thawed out a bit, I was hungry again. The night lunch wasn't much: coarse grained cold bread, clammy salami, mummified bologna, and cheese a rat would refuse. What made it worse, there wasn't anything left but crumbs because the old seaman had eaten it all. My belly was singing a long lament, and I kept thinking about that meal I had in Louisiana, and this process led inevitably to the officer's night lunch. I figured the skipper was in his sack, and I crept forward to the pantry. I opened the icebox, and there it was, all the delicatessen my soul as well as the stomach craved, and I ate hearty. Stuffing it with both hands, the stolen feet called for coffee. Boiled only once coffee in a silver percolator when I heard familiar steps. The skipper had been roused by either intuition or hunger and was heading for the pantry. I beat him out the door by a whisker, and for some stupid reason I was carrying the coffee pot with me. Thereupon began a chase that was never bettered by the Keystone Cops or the Ritz brothers. Still grasping that percolator, I took off. The captain, wearing carpet slippers, took one look at his ravaged icebox, the door gaping open, and a gimbaled holder on which his purloined coffee pot once had rested. He let out a scream like a wounded banshee and took off after me. Around, over, and practically under the ship we went, aft to fore and fore to aft, the skipper cursing, stumbling, and blowing his whistle for aid. It sounded like the Apaches had captured the fort and were scalping everybody. I was pretty young and sure-footed, and I knew that ship and its cargo as I knew my fingers, and what to me was a beaten track was an obstacle course to the captain, who ordinarily stayed close to the chart room. He fell over the deck cargo and barked his shins, slipped on the watery deck, collided with bulkheads, lost his footing on ladders, but he continued to blow his whistle and scream for assistance. He got assistance all right. He roused the off-watch mates and the steward's department and the deck gang and the black gang, and he also roused me. I had long since flung his coffee pot over the side, not wishing to be caught with the evidence, and I joined the provocative coloration of the herd of drowsy men. I made myself busy at all sorts of things, like trimming the vents and slapping Suji on distant bulkheads, and when the skipper herded everybody into the crew mess to sort out the culprit, you might have seen the canary's feathers fluffing out of my lips. There were over 30 men on that ship, and it's hard to pick a night lunch thief out of 30 men, unless you stomach pump them all. Fortunately, the Sundance did not carry a stomach pump, although I had a fleeting suspicion that the skipper might order the ship's carpenter to jury-rig a food detector out of the bilge pump. The skipper ranted and roared and swore that he would keel-haul the guilty party when he caught them, and in the meantime there would be no pay when we docked and no shore leave at all. I suppose if it had been wartime, he would have shot the entire crew. The captain ultimately lost his voice, swore a final husky oath of vengeance, and departed, croaking. Everybody went to bed, and I went back on the forecastle head to announce colliding dolphins and reflect aloud that the lights running in masthead were bright, sir. After the Hare and Hounds episode, I had little difficulty concentrating on the midday meal on the Bayou Filbert because I was stuffed with the skipper's late lunch and had scored my first and only victory over the anointed personnel of the wallowing bucket Sundance from Savannah. I spoke aloud into the wind, addressing the old man off somewhere in infinity. I hope you're satisfied, I said. You could have got me hanged from the yardarm. This'll teach you to expose me to Louisiana food. That day on the bayou, after we'd finished preparing the ducks and oysters and fish and the shrimp and the crawfish, we saw the entire fruits of the morning collection passed down into the lunch's galley, where Pierre was chef. I had stoked myself pretty well with raw oysters and clams, but there was still plenty of space in the boilers for whatever Pierre was making. What he was making was one big dish, and he made it in an iron cauldron big enough to boil a hog in. It was jambalaya. Call it philo, pelo, pilu, pella, or anything you want, but its main ingredients are rice and red peppers. Into the rice had been mixed shrimps, oysters, clams, crawfish, pork sausage, great white slabs of fish, a chicken for the stock, and the whole business cooked together until it was one great big wonderful adventure. Pierre had cooked the rice with saffron so that it came out yellow, and the juices from the seafood and chicken had got married in a tremendous soup-and-a ceremony, so that the rice, while dry by grain, was damp by volume, and the hunks of fish and shellfish hadn't lost any of their flavor, but were nuggeted throughout the rice. He served all this with great big chunks of crusty French bread for mopping up a gallon of homemade red wine, and we finished up with Louisiana chicory coffee that was so strong you had to cut it to drink it. Even with an elder gentleman's estimation of a young man's anaconda capacity, I hesitate to recall how much I ate, sitting with a basin of this stuff in my lap, soaking in the sun, listening to the birds in the marsh, watching the fish jumping in the sparkling breeze-ruffled bayou, and smelling the good smells of decaying oyster shells and marsh grass mud. Pierre observed the destruction of his masterpiece with proper Gaelic pride, although he played it coy. "Dat only middle day snack him," he announced. You take little sleep now, and then go shoot goose. I think I don't go. I think I stay here on boat and make really good big supper, me. You got plenty of people for shoot goose." The old man said he thought he'd grab 40 winks below, and the other people said, "By guard, dat one hell of good idea." But I stayed up topside and just sort of snoozed on the cabin top. About 3 o'clock, the old man stuck his head out of the cabin and announced that I'd better take some number 2s along with the 4s if I intended to go shoot a goose that day. "I already shot a goose," I said, "with a duck load." "You shot a pin-feathered adolescent goose," the old man replied. "I'm talking about real grown-up geese, including maybe a honker from Canada. You don't want to mess around with 6s on those fellows. Buckshot ain't too big for a real hoary old gander. They can pack off a power of lead." The Cajun started piling stuff, including a bundle of reeds, into a broad-beamed, shallow draft bateau about the size of a surf boat but wider. It had a small engine in it. The bateau had been floating tandem to the launch. "You don't need Piro for goose," Anatole said. "You need big boat. We just go along bayou in dese bateau. When we park him long leave, walk through muck, make Blaine shoot plenty goose. We shoot off prairie." We putted along the bayou for half a dozen miles. The flights of geese were enormous, and they settled in huge flocks on the water-soft savannas the Cajun called prairie, semi-bogs covered with bright green grasses. In the distance you could see the feeding geese, blue some, many white, as if you'd changed their plumage with age. Once in a while a V-ended double thread of bigger, grayer geese entered the party. Canucks. I looked and saw no decoys in the boat, and finally screwed up courage enough to ask why. Dee laughed. "Dee's ver intelligent goose," he said. "Read all de time. We use pick a new newspaper, stick him on prairie, goose fly down to read all de news, shoot goose, bim bam." I looked at the old man. "Man, you remember that time we were making decoys and you said they don't look like ducks to you," he said, and I said they may not look like ducks to you, but they look like ducks to a duck. Same thing. You fold these papers, prop 'em up with a stick in front of the blind, and to a flying goose they look like a whole herd of geese feeding. You call the goose right, and the old stud gander will fetch his flock in. We chuffed along some more, and on both sides of the bayou the geese rose with wild annoyed honking in clouds of thousands until the sky was filled with 100,000. The noise they made was unbelievable. Dee, who was steering the bateau, finally nosed her into a cut, pushed a pole into soggy turf, and announced it was firm enough to walk on. He drove his pole deeply into the turf, bent the bent the bow painter around the pole, and let the bateau swing with the tide until she nestled against the bank. Allons nous, Dee said. We go shoot de goose. We went off to shoot de goose, each man carrying his gun, each man with a couple of boxes of shells. I looked at the old man and saw he was loading his long barrels with a 4 right, a 2 left, and I did the same. I'd get mixed up later, maybe, but at least I'd start right. Anyway, over yonder the ground was snowdrifted with geese. Flocks whirled and circled lazily, and then dropped the undercarriage and slanted down to feed. 2 of the Cajuns, Anatole and Francos, started splicing the reeds together to make small repairs to a blind that had been shot over before. There was a plank, a long one, mounted on sawhorse legs inside the blind. Better than get derriere wet seating in this prairie, Anatole said. He's looked dry, but he got plenty water under grass him. For the first time, I really noticed that I was muddy past my shins. The water seeped up from the muck and came all the way through the grasses when you put your foot down hard. While Anatole and Francos were repairing the blind, Dee was out with the newspapers, which he had been folding into a very credible representation of a goose. The wings cocked so the paper extended into his searching neck, scanning the sky, or a feeding neck crooked over and inspecting the muck for nutriment. Even at a short distance, they looked remarkably like feeding geese. From the air, I imagined they would look exactly like feeding geese, even to a goose. He's not bad, Anatole said, but he's not the best. When we shoot a few goose, we run out quick, us, and plant the dead goose and fork sticks so we have next best thing to live goose. Then the goose he come plenty him. Dee finished his paperwork, gave a look around, seemed satisfied, and scurried into a blind. We sat along the 16-foot length of plank, each man with a shell box open in front of him. Who de goose? Dee asked. I think Francos. You call de goose, you. Francos scorned a mechanical collar. He cupped his hand around his mouth and yelped. He pleaded and cajoled and attracted the interest of a big flock of white geese. They circled 3 times, were not alarmed at the blind or at the picayune decoys, and sailed in for dinner. I performed in my usual fashion. I picked the biggest, oldest, toughest, grisliest gander I could get under my sights and gave him 2. He more or less cocked an eye at me and went swiftly elsewhere. I reloaded while I listened to the soggy thump of other people's geese hitting the prairie. One was a runner that got up and shook his head, and I settled his troubles for him, figuring I'd better contribute something to the party. We let the dead geese lie. The old man had a smug look about his mustache that indicated he had scored a double. All told, there were 6 geese down by 7 shooters. Since I got none and giving the old man 2, the other 5 boys shared 4. Somebody else missed 2, I thought, and felt better. Franco started to gabble goosey again, and before long in came another flock. This time I committed my second mistake. I let go both barrels at the entire flock, where it was biggest, and something dropped this time. A handful of feathers. Around me was the solid thud-thud of geese falling like sacks. I counted, and now there were 14. Everybody was improving but me. Dee held up a hand. Now we got the real decoy, he said. And Anatole, you help me fix, you. They scuttled out of the blind, keeping low, and replaced 14 folded newspapers with 14 dead geese. Their necks jammed in forked sticks, their wings braced in a flap or left to fold. Some had necks crooked, some extended. They looked like feeding geese, even more so to a goose. Back in the blind, Dee squinted at the horizon. A small V of birds, bigger and blacker in the distance, was headed our way. Less Canadians, Dee said. My goose French, she's more better than you, he said to Francos. I called these cousins from Canada. He changed the timbre slightly and began to talk. The Canucks halted slightly as the call touched them, and the lead gander inclined his head to look at the ground. He seemed satisfied and came on. The Canadas, big, gray, black-headed, with their white collars, came on, swept round in great circles, losing altitude all the time, and then came straight in like a great covey of aircraft. While they were coming, I slipped the number 4 out of the barrel and shoved in another 2. This time, by gar, I wasn't going to miss me. I still went for the gander, which flew almost into the gun barrel, and then Flint shuddered and fell when the load struck him. I watched him drop from under the gun and switched to a male friend that was struggling for altitude and led him too much for a big goose, but managed to put the full load into his head and neck. Down he came like a rock, and while I did not blow through the smoking barrels, I felt like it. I had my geese for the day. The other folks could mess around with blue geese and white geese, but I had a full bag of bull elephant. Blue geese, me, no blue geese. The pros shoot only the Canucks. The old man looked at me and grinned. There'll be no living with him, he said to nobody at all, and shrugged. Then I looked at the goose-littered terrain, and there were 2 more Canadas, both females, lying close abroad my ganders. Just call me a pot hunter, not a hero, the old man said. We got enough geese, boys. Let us all alones now the hell out of here. I'll say we had enough geese. We had enough for everybody to make 2 trips from the blind to the bateau. He'd look like we shoot a snowstorm, Pierre ventured, except for maybe 1-2 little spots dirty snow. My big gander weighed 14 pounds. That is a very large gander. It is now about 10 minutes again from the finished lookout and the same dreadful breakfast. As I sat down at the table, my foxhole-head mind raced back again to the dinner Pierre had smoked in the galley when we arrived triumphant with a bateau full of geese. He had oysters on the half-shell. We had tawny red soup called crayfish bisque, with the big cray's heads and all in the sherry-rich soup. We had tiny teal broiled with bacon like baby chickens, which fell apart in the fingers. Each man had a big pintail cooked to pieces with carrots and onions and potatoes and apples and sage shoved into its inside. We had that French bread with a chicory salad and a side dish of redfish with a sauce of tiny shrimps and sherry and cream, which Pierre got the Lord knows where unless he hijacked a cow. We had coffee. Tomorrow, Pierre said, we have roast goose with fresh goose livers for the hors d'oeuvres. The city of Hamburg, Germany, has a fine roast goose, and it is possible to buy a good goose liver sausage, and if you are in funds, a fine goose liver pate that comes from Strasbourg. When we docked there, the skipper forgot the night lunch stealing episode and paid us off. Still haunted by Louisiana memories, I went ashore and blew a week's pay in just one dinner. It was then I decided that the Germans, when war inevitably came, would lose it. They couldn't have touched Pierre's goose with the business end of a Pierrot pole.